Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. This week we're going to be looking back at this past box office weekend, which saw Challengers open at number 1, and we're going to be doing my annual top 10 summer box office predictions, where I predict the 10 highest grossing movies domestically this summer, and it was hard to choose the top 10 this year. Before we do either of those though, I want to make a quick programming note. Since I've been doing the show, well, pretty much ever, it's always been on either Monday afternoons or Tuesday mornings. It was on Monday afternoons back when I did it at Screen Junkies and also when I first started the channel. I moved it to Tuesday mornings a while back because I'm always waiting for those final box office numbers, which don't come in until Monday afternoon. Well, this year I'm trying to do some things to help the channel grow and to experiment a little bit. And one thing I've decided to try is to move Charts with Dan to Monday mornings, which means that I'll be using the Sunday estimates for the show. And I know that I always call them the dreaded estimates because I do want those actual numbers. I feel like it makes some of the show more complete. But when you're doing the calculus on running a YouTube channel and what can help you grow, something that you have to be prepared to do is to give a little bit to maybe get a little bit back. And I'm well aware that part of the appeal of box office news is that it's timely. And I'm very happy with the viewership on the show, but I do want to try to boost it just a little bit. And I've done everything I can do, I think, with the actual numbers and moving the show around. And I think that we've hit a good number, but it's a number that I think maybe could be better. So for the summer movie season, at least, I'm going to move the show to Monday mornings using those estimates. I'm still going to do the same deep dives. The content of the show isn't really going to change other than using the estimated numbers rather than the final numbers. If we can grow the audience a little bit doing the show earlier, that's great. If the audience stays the same and I feel like, well, we may as well move it back to Tuesdays, then we might do that as well. There is a lot of experimentation that goes on as you're trying to grow things, and we'll see what happens here. But the show itself isn't really going to change other than the fact that we use estimates versus final numbers. And if something big changes when those final numbers come in, I'll go back the next week and correct that or update those charts. So with that programming note out of the way, let's look at the box office weekend that we just experienced, which, as I mentioned, saw Challengers open at number 1 with just over $15 million. That's about where people expected it, maybe a little bit lower than some estimates. This was a very ambitiously budgeted movie for what it was. It had a budget of over $50 million. So we will see how it does as far as recouping that. Personally, I applaud giving a filmmaker like Luca Guadagnino. I said it wrong. I keep saying it Guadagnino, and it's Luca Guadagnino. I applaud giving a director like him those sort of resources for this movie. I think you could see that it was put to use as far as the technical aspects of the film, as well as, getting talent like Zendaya on board. But that is also kind of the risk that you take. Challengers isn't exactly a mainstream film, especially once you see that it does some unconventional things with the narrative, etc. The marketing wasn't exactly what the movie ended up being. So when you put a $50 million budget instead of maybe a $15 million budget like you might be used to seeing on a movie like this, the stakes are a little bit higher as far as recouping those costs. We'll see how it does in the weeks ahead and how it does internationally. In second place was Unsung Hero, the real-life story behind Australian Christian musicians for King and Country and Rebecca St. James, marketed again toward the Christian crowd, a $7.7 million debut in second place. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire stays in third place in its 5th week of release, a 24.6% drop for a $7.2 million total. Its domestic total is now over $180 million. Civil War in week 3 drops 37.6%, a pretty decent hold at just over $7 million. A pretty aggressive fight here for second place. Its domestic total now at $56.1 million. In 5th place was Abigail in its second week, a 49.5% drop, which given the genre and the cinema score, again, not bad considering where many other films have landed after those two things. $5.2 million and an $18.7 million domestic total so far. And let's look at the top 5 very quickly. Just a couple of notes on some of these films. I mentioned Challengers and director Luca Guadagnino, and these are his domestic grosses. These aren't opening weekend grosses. These are final domestic grosses for his top 5 performing films. And you can see that Challengers is almost already at the top of the list. His highest grossing film was Call Me By Your Name at $18 million. Challengers Challengers in second place at $15 million. Then we had Bones and All, which ended up at $7.8 million. The breakout film for Luca Guadagnino, I Am Love, came in at just over $5 million. And then Suspiria, his remake of the classic horror film, only made $2.4 million back in 2018. Of course, Challengers had the most resources by far poured into it than any other film on this list. I also have another chart, and it's a very hyper-specific chart, but I think it's kind of interesting in how specific it is. There are only 3 movies on this list, but I thought it was kind of entertaining. These are the top 3 domestic grosses for tennis films starring an actress who also played a Spider-Man love interest. Believe it or not, yes, there are 3 of these. The highest grossing film in this category is Wimbledon, starring Kirsten Dunst, who of course was Mary Jane against Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. It made $17 million. Challengers is going to be number 1 on this list, starring Zendaya, the MJ to Tom Holland Spider-Man, because it's already at $15 million. And then we had the historical movie Battle of the Sexes, starring Emma Stone, who was Gwen Stacy to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, at $12.6 million. Again, not a very deep list, but kind of odd that this has happened 3 times. Looking at the legendary MonsterVerse as far as domestic grosses, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is now less than $20 million away from bypassing 2014's Godzilla to become the highest grossing domestic MonsterVerse movie. We'll see how it holds up against the early summer competition to see if it can bank another $19 million or so. I think it's going to be a pretty close competition. We may have a photo finish here. And then wrapping up with Civil War, we've been tracking this chart the last few weeks. It is now the second highest grossing film in the history of A24. Although again, like Challengers, this was a movie that had many more resources put into it than pretty much all of these movies. Everything Everywhere All at Once is still the highest grossing domestic release for A24 at $77.1 million. Civil War is now in second place at $56.1 million. That unseats Uncut Gems. It's now in third place at just over $50 million. Lady Bird is at $48.9 million in fourth place. Talk to Me is in fifth place at $48.2 million. Hereditary is in sixth place at $44 million. I have not seen official numbers on its IMAX re-release, which was great last week, by the way. I was so happy I got to see it, but it wouldn't have put it into that top 5. The Iron Claw is in 7th place, Moonlight is in 8th, Midsommar is in 9th, and Ex Machina is in 10th place. Let's look at numbers 6 through 10 at the box office last weekend. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare drops 56.9% off an already disappointing debut for $3.8 million. Its domestic total is now at $15.4 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 continues to hold well in its 8th week. It dropped 23.4% for a $3.5 million weekend total. Its domestic total now at $185 million. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire didn't hold great to begin with, but has had decent holds in the latter part of its box office run. It drops 27% for a $3.2 million weekend. Its domestic total now is at $107.3 million. Dune Part 2 spends a 9th weekend in the top 10. It dropped 30.7%, went back into some IMAX theaters this past weekend, bringing in just over $2 million. Its domestic total now at $279.8 million. And then in 10th place, initially the estimates had it out of 10th place, but it was able to score that 10th place finish over the re-release of Alien. Boy Kills World at $1.6 million. This had some decent reactions from some critics and from some moviegoers, but it seems like the marketing just wasn't enough to get an audience to turn up. Dropping out of the top 10 this week, we had 3 movies. Monkey Man and The First Omen are both out after 3 weeks, and Spy Family Code White is out after 1 week. It dropped over 75%, which is not unusual for anime releases. They are often very heavily front-loaded. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, now this could be either adding or losing theaters. This weekend, it happened to be all theater losses. The First Omen lost over half of its theaters, 1,430 of them. It remains at literally the lowest number you can get while still being in wide release. 1,000 theaters on the dot. Monkey Man lost 1,103 theaters. It remains in just over 1,500. Dune Part 2 lost 680 theaters despite going back into some IMAX theaters. Its theater count is now at 1,334. The 20th anniversary re-release of Shrek 2 lost 565 theaters. It's still in 254, so get out there quick if you want to see Shrek 2 on the big screen. And The Long Game lost 484 theaters. It remains in 341. Two movies I have listed as closed this week, meaning they did not report grosses for this past weekend as of the time I'm taping this show. Bob Marley One Love, after a 420 expansion the previous weekend, is now closed after 11 weeks at $96.8 million. It wasn't quite able to hit that $100 million domestic mark. And Imaginary, after 7 weeks, closes after a $28 million total. And let's look at the profitability of Bob Marley One Love. It was one of the few highlights of the early part of this year. It did not release in China, so nothing coming back to investors from there. It made $80.3 million internationally, so $32.1 million coming back from that release. $57.6 million from what I'm calling domestic week one, which is really about a week and a half. It was a midweek release. That brings back $34.6 million. $17.6 million from domestic week two. That brings back $9.7 million. And then a 50-50 share from domestic week three on. That brings back about $10.7 million. The budget for the film was reported at around $70 million. I'm giving it an advertising budget of $40, which would be $110 million as far as cost. The worldwide gross is $177.1 million. I'm estimating a net at $87.2 million against costs of $110 million. And that means that the movie is in the red when you look at theatrical revenue to the tune of about $22.7 million. But I think when you're in that range, it is very likely, I would say more than likely, almost certain that the movie is going to turn a profit for Paramount, because you're going to get that back in licensing, you're going to get that back in digital rentals and physical media sales, etc. That's why I always say, just because a movie loses money in the theatrical window, that doesn't make it an unprofitable film. This is going to be a movie that turns a profit, and I think it probably did better than a lot of people would have expected. That $70 million budget, I think, is what held it back maybe from that theatrical profitability. It was a COVID era release, which comes with extra costs because you have to take extra steps during the production. We have a lot of budgets that were inflated due to COVID. I think if it were made today, it might be closer to $50 million or so, which really would have put it right on the line as far as theatrical profitability. Let's take a look at what I like to call our road to recovery. The blue line is the box office weekend average for the years 2015 through 2019. The red line is the average for 2021 to 2023. And the dotted black line represents the weekend grosses for this year. And you can see that we are pretty much almost exactly where we have been for 2021 through 2023 on average, but far below where we were pre-pandemic, largely because this was the weekend 5 years ago. That's hard for me to believe. 5 years ago that Avengers Endgame debuted. It was really the weekend before the summer box office season started. So 5 years on from Avengers Endgame, and we are pretty much at a box office low. Will we ever reach those heights again? I think that we could for individual films, but it's hard to look back on 2019 and see the box office making that much money consistently, at least not in the near future. Let's look at the top 5 films outside of the US and Canada. These are the top 5 international films. At number 1 is The Roundup Punishment, which made $24.3 million in South Korea. It is the 4th film in the popular South Korean action franchise starring Ma Dong-seok, best known to American audiences perhaps as Gilgamesh in Eternals. A big opening in South Korea. I believe it was their biggest opening of the year so far. In second place was Godzilla Kong: The New Empire at $14.9 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 makes $11.6 million. Challengers opened to $9 million outside of the domestic marketplace. And The Fall Guy got an early start in a lot of markets, including Australia, where it was shot at $8.6 million. When you take those international grosses, you combine it with our domestic grosses, we get the top 5 films worldwide. And at number 1 was The Roundup Punishment. That South Korean gross was enough to make it number 1. Challengers, though, right behind. It was almost the number 1 movie in the world at $24 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire right behind at $22.1 million, a 29% drop from last weekend. Kung Fu Panda 4 drops 23.6% at $15.2 million. And Civil War drops 29.5% right behind at $15.1 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is about $20 million behind Godzilla domestically, and it's less than $10 million behind Godzilla worldwide. It is at $521.4 million. It has eclipsed the $500 million mark, and it is less than $10 million away from becoming the second highest grossing legendary MonsterVerse movie worldwide. It's also about $47 million away from moving past Kong Skull Island to become the overall highest grossing legendary MonsterVerse movie. And I will continue to track its performance to see if it can take that number 1 spot both domestically and worldwide. I think it's going to be close on both accounts. Let's look at some of the specialty charts, starting with the per theater averages for this past weekend. At number 1 is The Roundup Punishment, which had a very, very limited release here on the domestic side. It made $27,842 per theater in just 2 theaters. The Feeling That the Time for Doing Something Has Passed, it's a very long title, also played in 2 theaters and brought in $7,056 per theater. It's from writer-director Joanna Arnau, a comedy about a woman facing a life crisis in her 30s. Would that be quarter life? You're approaching midlife. You're right between quarter life and midlife there. Challengers is in 3rd place. It brought in $4,317 per theater in each of its 3,477 theaters. In 4th place was Nowhere Special, which played in 4 theaters and brought in $3,763 per theater. It's a movie about a dad who has to figure out his son's future after a terminal diagnosis, and this movie premiered at the Venice Film Festival all the way back in 2020, so it's taken 4 years to find its way to theaters here in the domestic marketplace. And in 5th place was Unsung Hero, which brought in $2,730 per theater in 2,832 theaters. Looking at the 2024 per theater averages, The Roundup Punishment moves into that 5th place spot, knocking Godzilla Kong: The New Empire out of the top 5. These are now all limited releases. $27,842 in 2 theaters is good enough for that 5th place spot. Problemista's at number 4. Stress Positions is at number 3. Love Lies Bleeding is at number 2. And The Taste of Things remains at number 1, bringing in $43,350 per theater in just 3 theaters back in February. The top 5 films in limited release, that would be 1,000 theaters or fewer, were led by Escape from Germany in a very slow week for the specialty box office. Playing in 132 theaters, it brought in $289,000 total. Shayar, in an unknown number of theaters, brought in $263,000. Shayar is an Indian romance in the Punjabi language. We Grown Now expanded to 340 theaters and brought in $120,913. Sasquatch Sunset in 562 theaters brought in just over $100,000. And The Beast, which has been knocking around the limited release space for a few weeks now, brought in $64,000 in 5th place. Looking at the 2024 domestic box office picture, and this will now also become the winter box office, winter being January through April. Of course, the summer box office starts next week. It's May through August. Dune Part 2 remains at number 1 at $279.8 million, followed by Kung Fu Panda 4 at $185 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is gaining fast, though. It's at $181.7 million. It will likely be number 2 by the time we do the show next week. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire is in 4th place. Bob Marley: One Love is in 5th. Mean Girls is in 6th. The Beekeeper is in 7th. Civil War moves up 1 spot to number 8. That bumps Argyle down to number 9. And Madam Web stays at number 10. Looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, a few different milestones crossed by several movies. Dune Part 2 crosses $700 million worldwide. It's at $704.3 million. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire passes $500 million. It's at $521.4 million. And Kung Fu Panda 4 also passes $500 million. It's at $503.7 million. YOLO remains at number 4, followed by Pegasus 2, Article 20, and Boonie Bear's Time Twist. Those are all Chinese films. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire moves up 1 spot to number 8. It's now made $187.9 million worldwide. Bob Marley: One Love moves down 1 spot to number 9. And The Beekeeper stays at number 10. We're going to skip the box office flashback for this week because I want to jump into the summer movies, but before we do that, I want to thank the sponsor for this show, Mando. This episode's brought to you by Mando. People think I'm crazy when I say this, but I'm not a big fan of summer, and one big reason is that I sweat a lot. And I hate doing the stealth pit smell maneuver to make sure I'm not stinking up the joint after I've been sweating outside. But that pressure's now off with Mando because no matter how much I sweat, I'll still smell like $1,000,000. I mean, I won't smell like money, but you know what I mean. Mando whole body deodorant is safe to use anywhere on your body and is made with mandelic acid, which blocks the bacteria on your skin from causing odor. I put Mando on before mowing the yard the other day, and even though I sweat just as much as I always do, I didn't feel like I had to avoid talking to the neighbors so I could rush inside and take a shower. Right now, I'm using a solid stick deodorant, a bar for the shower, and even some deodorant wipes in case I need to stay fresh on the go. And Mando is clinically proven to control odor better than a shower with soap alone. If you're new to Mando, their starter pack is for you. You get a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like a mini body wash or deodorant wipes, and free shipping. Luckily, I have a discount code to help you get hooked on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market right now. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Just use code DAN at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com and use the promo code DAN. All right, let's jump into the summer movie season, which does start this upcoming weekend. It's the first weekend in May. Why? Because that's when studios decided that it starts. It used to be Memorial Day. Now it's the first weekend in May. It runs all the way through Labor Day. Before we get to my predictions, I want to take a look at the market share. So when you take all of the ticket sales this year so far, which studios have the biggest share of those tickets sold? We looked at this chart about a month ago. This is what it looked like about the end of March. Warner Brothers had a 26.88% share, Universal at 21.9%, Sony at 12.7%, Paramount at 11.8%, Disney, which has basically sat out the first 4 months of the year, at 2.4%, Lionsgate at 4.5%, Amazon at 8.15%, and then all other studios at 11.62%. Here's how that chart has changed in the last month and how it looks as we're going into the summer movie season. And you see that Warner Brothers really has just picked up market share. It went from 26% to 30% market share. Universal stays about the same. It's at 20.38%. So Warner Brothers and Universal together make up half of all ticket sales since January 1st. Sony is pretty much in exactly the same spot at around 12.7%. Paramount lost a little bit of market share. It's at 8.4%. Disney is pretty much a non-factor still. It's at 2.76%. It's just been re-releasing movies to start off the year. Lionsgate picked up about a half a percentage point. It's at 5%. Amazon is at 6.5%. And then all others also picked up some market share at 13.97%, helped by Civil War, which was released by A24, as well as other movies. So that's really where we are going into the summer movie season. We have two studios with half of the business so far, but Disney's jumping in with Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2. So I think that this chart, as we go through the summer season and we get to the end of it, should look fairly substantially different than it looks here as we begin the season. But let's get down to business and have me reveal my picks for the 10 highest grossing movies of summer 2024. Again, this is domestic grosses due to worldwide release calendars, etc. So this isn't about what it's going to make everywhere else but the US and Canada. This is only the domestic market. I think I've been doing this for about 9 years, and I have to say, I think I have the lowest confidence in my picks this year more than any other year. There are 3 or 4 movies that I could say I'm pretty sure or almost definitely sure are going to be on the list. But the other movies, I can make as many arguments for movies that I left off as movies that I put on, and I could probably shoot holes through the movies that I put on this list. This is a weird summer. There was a lot of stuff that was delayed by the strikes. Nobody really knows what people are going to go see in the movies. So as much as any other year, this is a complete guess. I mean, I narrowly avoided embarrassment last year. I almost didn't put Barbie on my list at all. I put it at number 10. So it's not like even in different years, this is a science or I'm the most accurate person in the world. This is always guesswork. So what are the movies that I think will be the 10 highest grossing domestic films at the summer box office? Well, we'll start with number 10. And as with most number 10s, it's one of the picks for this list that I have the least confidence in. I'm picking at number 10, Alien Romulus. I could give you 15 different reasons why this is a bad pick, but I'm putting it on here because there are often some adult skewing titles that are on the top 10 list, and because it's an August release, it'll have a little bit more room. There is often a mid to late August movie that ends up being one of the 10 highest grossing summer movies. There is some positive buzz around this movie and around director Fede Alvarez and the fact that it could be replicating the original Alien and also James Cameron's Aliens, perhaps more so than any other Alien sequel since. So I'm really just taking a flyer here and putting Alien Romulus at number 10. At number 9 is Bad Boys Ride or Die. I know that there were probably a lot of people that went to see the last Bad Boys film because it had been so long since the previous one, but the last one was also well received. Will Smith, I think, is still a movie star. People bring up the Oscar thing. I don't think that that's going to keep the average moviegoer out of the theater, and it's also something that happened a while back. It's just not something that I think is playing into a whole lot of people's minds, and if this one can be as well received as the last movie, I could see this being the kind of action movie, summer action movie that people enjoy. This is another one I'm really not sure about. I could see this being an absolute flop, but I picked the Garfield movie at number 8. It's got the Memorial Day weekend slot. A lot of people want to take their kids over the long weekend to the movies, and this is the kids movie that's going to be in the market. Now, do kids care about Garfield? I have no idea, but you have Chris Pratt voicing the character. He did Mario. This is just a guess, as they're all guesses, but the big family movie in theaters over Memorial Day weekend, I don't think is a terrible flyer to take, so I'm putting the Garfield movie at number 8. At number 7 is A Quiet Place, Day 1. Again, I could see this being a disappointment, but A Quiet Place Part 2 was one of the few movies that actually was able to stand out at the box office in the very early days of the box office reopening back in 2021. I remember the billboard for A Quiet Place Part 2 looming over one of the major thoroughfares in Los Angeles for months during the pandemic because it was slated to open very shortly after theaters closed. I think the trailer for the movie looks solid. It seems like people are still interested in this franchise, so I picked it there at number 7. In 6th place, I'm picking Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. Many people didn't expect Mad Max Fury Road to be a top 10 summer movie, but it was back in 2015, and I'm hoping that George Miller can recreate that magic. If it turns out to be a disappointment, I don't necessarily think that this is something that people are going to go see no matter what, but it's also spectacle. It's meant to be watched in IMAX, and that has been something that's performed really well. Movies that people feel like they have to go see in theaters. And a lot of the reason I pick some of these films is because I feel like they might have that buzz. You can't wait to see it at home. You have to go see it in theaters. So I picked Furiosa at number 6, and I really hope it's good because I love Mad Max Fury Road. At number 5 is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. This might be way too high, but it's also one of the early big summer movies. If it's good, it could get that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes buzz. I know that War for the Planet of the Apes was a disappointment a few years back when it opened, but this one seems a little more actiony, not quite as meditative as War for the Planet of the Apes, and maybe people are ready to go back into this universe. So maybe it shouldn't be so high. I'm second guessing it here watching, but I put it there at number 5. I'm really high on my number 4 pick, Twisters. This may be a huge embarrassment for me, but I just have a feeling, again, it is big screen spectacle. You have people of a certain age, namely my age, who are very nostalgic for the original Twister film. If they can make that same kind of fun movie, then I could see a lot of people going to see it. And then people that didn't see the original Twister, if it has that big screen buzz, you've got Glenn Powell on board, people like Glenn Powell. I don't know. I just have a feeling that maybe Twister is going to surprise some people. You can't do all chalk and you can't play it safe all the time. You have to be ready to embarrass yourself just a little bit. So that's where I am with Twisters. Probably my biggest risk of major embarrassment this year, but I've got it there at number 4. At number 3 is Inside Out 2 from Pixar. To me, this is really the big test for Pixar. You've had a lot of movies that were original movies. Lightyear, yes, was part of the Toy Story franchise, but not really. People were confused by it. The movie didn't really share anything at all in common with Toy Story, and it didn't do well. This is the movie, if it doesn't perform, that will really tell us that Pixar is in major trouble, because this is probably the safest movie other than a Toy Story 5 that they could put out right now. People love Inside Out. I know it's been about 10 years since the first one came out, but it's also one of the bigger crossover ones for Pixar as far as adults and kids finding something in it that they love. It may not make it to number 3, but again, if this movie drastically underperforms at the box office, then that is a huge sign that Pixar overall is in big trouble. At number 2 is the only MCU movie that we're getting this summer, Deadpool and Wolverine. Yes, it's rated R, but we had a pretty big R-rated hit last year with Oppenheimer. And if we're going to see an R-rated movie hit number 2 in the summer, Deadpool and Wolverine is a pretty solid choice. There's always the possibility that this is a disappointing film, that the word of mouth isn't good, and that it doesn't even reach these heights. But I trust Ryan Reynolds. He's delivered 2 solid Deadpool movies. You have that buzz of Hugh Jackman, that sort of multiverse buzz that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness this had. If this were a PG-13 rated release, I might put it at number 1. I'm glad it's not. I'm glad it is R-rated, but I do think it's going to keep it down there at number 2. And that leaves the movie that I am picking to be the number 1 movie of the summer. And they say sometimes you have to just set your personal preferences aside, look at the market, and make a sober judgment, which means that I am putting my own personal box office fate into the hands of my sworn enemies, the bane of my life as a movie critic, the Minions, because I am choosing Despicable Me 4 to be the number 1 grossing movie of the summer domestically. It might be the number 1 grossing movie of the summer worldwide. It's really got everything going for it. The Minions had a huge box office hit back in 2022. It's got that July 3rd date when families are going to the movies. I just really couldn't come up with a whole lot of negative cases to not put it at number 1. So even though I hate the Minions so much, I am picking Despicable Me 4 to be the number 1 movie of the summer. So let's recap my list. These are my 2024 top 10 summer box office predictions domestically. At number 1, Despicable Me 4, which comes out the weekend of July 3rd. At number 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, which releases on July 26th. Inside Out 2 is at number 3. That releases on June 14th. Then we have Twisters at number 4, which releases July 19th. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which releases May 10th, is at number 5. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which comes out May 24th, is at number 6. A Quiet Place Day 1, which hits theaters June 28th, is at number 7. The Garfield movie, which opens May 24th, is at number 8. Bad Boys, Ride or Die, which opens June 7th, is at number 9. And Alien Romulus, which opens August 16th, is at number 10. But as I mentioned, there are other movies that didn't make this list that I can make a positive argument for. A few of those movies include The Fall Guy, of course, which opens this upcoming weekend. You've got Ryan Gosling coming off Barbie. You've got Emily Blunt. People like both of them. It's a comedy. Even if it doesn't open huge, I could see it having big legs at the box office. So I could see that being a top 10 movie. I could easily see If, starring Ryan Reynolds, being a top 10 movie. It was on this list at one point. He could have 2 big summer movies. If you're going to bank on a movie star right now, Ryan Reynolds isn't a bad choice. You've got John Krasinski directing. So this could be a movie that really hits with that family audience. Horizon, an American Saga, is a bit of a wild card here. You never quite know what's going to happen with a Kevin Costner movie, but this is also the kind of movie that could tap into that adult market, the Oppenheimer market, the Sound of Freedom market, the older people that also want to go see a movie. And if Horizon, an American Saga ends up being great and really drawing in the Yellowstone crowd, you could see 2 of them in the top 10, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. So I could lose 2 spots to the Kevin Costner Western. Borderlands doesn't have a lot of buzz right now, but it's early yet. It doesn't come out till August. And if it gets the same kind of buzz that Fallout just got, which came out on Amazon, then I could see it being a late summer hit. And then we have M. Night Shyamalan's latest film, Trap. You never quite know what's going to happen with him. And if he can capture the zeitgeist again, if he can get that buzz going, you never know. He could take that August release all the way to the top 10. So those are my picks for the top 10 summer movies. As always, I'd love to hear what your picks are. And you never know, there could be a Sound of Freedom lurking out there, a movie that's on nobody's radar that ends up being a top 10 movie. And that summer movie season kicks off this weekend with The Fall Guy, which hits theaters here domestically. It's already in some theaters around the world. Also opening this week is the horror film Tarot. I don't think this is going to be a top 10 summer movie. We've seen a lot of re-releases lately, and Star Wars Episode 1 is hitting theaters nationwide once again this weekend. This is a classic movie to a lot of people, especially people that were younger than me back in 1999. So we'll see how it performs up against the beginning of the summer movie season. And then in limited release is I Saw the TV Glow, which got a lot of buzz at the Sundance Film Festival and which A24 is releasing, probably with an eye towards expansion in the weeks to come. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. Stay tuned right here for more movie reviews. I'm going to be reviewing The Fall Guy along with some other stuff this week, and box office news, regular entertainment news. You know, all the crazy stuff that we do here. If you like what you see, if you like the show, be sure to tell a friend, share the video, post it on social media, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so that you get notified. All of these things help the channel grow. And don't forget, next week, starting next week, that Charts with Dan will be on at the same time of day, but on Monday mornings instead of Tuesdays. We're going to do that experiment and see how it works out. As always, thanks for sharing part of your day here with me. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.